Hi, welcome to the next section of the WDAA Judges Seminar, where we will be discussing judging methodology and scoring. I'm Dr. Gail Hoff, and to give you a little of my background, in addition to being a research scientist, I have been a horse breeder, trainer, competitor, coach, and dressage judge for more than 45 years. I am a licensed large R Western dressage judge, an S dressage judge, and a large R dressage sport horse breeding judge. I am also the author of a series of books I call Harmonic Dressage, where I share some of what I have learned and experienced over a lifetime. In this section, we will discuss a consistent methodology for judging that is based upon the WDAA training wheel. When judging a movement, a judge should first determine if the movement was performed according to the criteria for it. For instance, if a horse is supposed to do a 20-meter circle in working jog at A, and yes, the horse did indeed circle at A at the working jog, then their score should be at least a 6, which is satisfactory. The score can then move higher or lower depending upon how well the requirements of the movement were met as determined by biomechanics, as well as how well the requirements of the training wheel were met. In this case, ask yourself if the circle was the correct size and shape and performed at the appropriate place. Next, ask yourself how well the requirements of the training wheel were met. Half points can then be used as modifiers. First, let's review the meaning of the numbers. All of you have seen this table and know the meaning of the numbers. I have simply added some gut feelings that I personally find helpful. For instance, a 10 is excellent and usually makes a judge want to stand up and cheer. 9 is very good, and you might say, wow, to yourself. 8 is good, and it usually grabs your attention and makes you feel good. 7 is fairly good, which for me means it's pleasant. 6 is satisfactory, and you are feeling just okay about the movement. 5 is marginal, you're not very happy. 4 is insufficient, meaning that the criteria and or the training wheel requirements were not met satisfactorily. 3 is fairly bad and worse than just insufficient. Often there is a disobedience. 2 is bad, meaning that the movement was recognizable but very poorly executed. 1 is very bad. This is when a movement is almost unrecognizable and you are asking yourself, what the heck is going on? 0 means that no part of the movement was performed. The half points can be used as modifiers. For instance, if a judge feels that a movement was good but not quite good enough for the next higher number, you can give a half point, or vice versa. If the movement was not performed very well for that number but not really bad enough for a lower number, then you can subtract a half a point from that number. A judge must keep his or her eye on the whole picture, and not only the individual movement. The biomechanics and gaits of a horse, together with its conformation, can affect the quality of a movement as well as the whole picture. Horses with correct conformation, good articulation of their joints, and free elastic gaits can have an advantage over those who are not so well endowed. The rider is, however, the pilot who can either show the correct training and natural abilities of the horse to an advantage or to a disadvantage. It is the rider who must be able to sit correctly and apply the aids correctly in order to meet the requirements of the training wheel. The skill of a rider will be reflected in the score a judge gives, but the comments a judge might dictate will reflect primarily how well the requirements of the training wheel were met. So the question is, what is the training wheel? The Western training wheel is similar to the classical training pyramid or training scale. It is composed of 6 spokes, which are all tied together mainly by the ability of the rider to sit and use the aids correctly. The spokes also build upon each other, starting with rhythm, which is the lightest color on this image, and culminating in collection, which is the darkest color. A judge must detect the presence or absence of each of these spokes in every movement, and the mark must be given accordingly. When a movement is performed, a judge must be able to determine not only if the movement was performed, but also how well it was executed as determined by biomechanics, as well as the directives on the Western dressage training wheel. Consequently, a judge must have a complete and thorough knowledge and understanding of the subject, Western dressage, which is based upon the Western training wheel. When using the training wheel as a guide to judging, one must keep in mind that the first 3 spokes, which are rhythm, suppleness, and connection, are fundamental for any horse at any level. Although the following 3 spokes of the training wheel, which are impulsion, straightness, and collection, must be considered when judging lower level horses, these spokes will play an even larger role in judging upper level horses. This is because a lower level horse cannot be expected to be able to generate as much impulsion nor be as straight and collected as an upper level horse. So we're going to take a look at the first 3 elements. Rhythm. Rhythm is the most fundamental spoke on the training wheel. Any movement must be performed within the correct rhythm. When judging rhythm, a judge should first look to see if the horse is working over its back and determine if there is a fundamental fault with the purity and regularity of the gait. A fundamental fault is one that is constantly present in a gait, such as an impure 4-beat lope instead of a 3-beat lope, or a jog that is always irregular. If a horse makes 1 or 2 irregular steps in a movement, it should not be considered a fundamental fault. A judge must be able to determine if a rhythm fault is fundamental or if it was caused by chance or accident. Rhythm also includes tempo, which should remain relatively constant within each gait. Lengthening of stride in the jog or lope should not look like a racehorse taking off. The indicators of rhythm are purity of gaits, freedom from the shoulder with equal length of stride from the hind legs in the walk and the jog, equal height of the steps between a pair of legs, and clear separation of the hind legs in the lope. When judging rhythm, focus upon the purity of the gaits. If irregularity is evident, determine if it is pervasive and fundamental or if it is transient, such as by a horse stepping on a stone or taking an irregular step. The fundamental rhythm of each gait will also be reflected in the collective marks. Suppleness is the next spoke on the training wheel. Suppleness means flexibility and elasticity. The back of the horse needs to be up, relaxed, and swinging. There's freedom of movement, and there's relaxation, both mental and physical. Suppleness and relaxation are key to training any horse at any level. When judging suppleness, focus upon how well the horse uses its back, as well as the flexibility and elasticity of the gaits. To receive high scores, a horse should be relaxed both mentally as well as physically. When a horse is distracted or tense, that tension is almost always reflected throughout the body of the horse as stiffness. Indicators of suppleness include such things as the tail of the horse swinging with the rhythm of the horse when the loin is supple. You have to ask yourself, is the tail relaxed? Is it clamped or cocked to one side, or is it constantly swishing? Of course, there are some breeds that carry their tails higher than others by nature, and this should not be taken as a detriment. It's just a breed characteristic. However, if you see further tension within the tail, you might want to look a little closer at how well the horse is using its back. Another indicator of suppleness is a closed mouth if the horse is wearing a bit, and the horse should be relaxed at the poll. Oversteps at the jog and the walk are also indicators of suppleness, although not all horses will have very much overstep. And it does not mean that they are not supple. It just means that they don't have the same biomechanics as another horse might have. Then when you look at the position and aids of the rider, if the horse is supple, the rider should be seated comfortably and centered over the backbone of the horse. The rider should show quiet hands. This is because half the seat of a rider belongs to the rider and the other half belongs to the horse. So if a horse is not supple over its back, the rider will have a more difficult time sitting upon the horse in a relaxed and centered way and might have difficulty showing quiet hands. So these are some of the indicators you can look for to determine how supple the horse is. The third spoke on the training wheel is connection. Connection involves self-carriage as well as acceptance of the aids. In self-carriage, the horse stretches down a little and the back is raised as the horse seeks connection and contact. The neck should not be raised nor shortened by the rider's hands. Acceptance of the aids means that the horse goes forward from the driving aids of the rider and also accepts the receiving aids of the hands, creating a back-to-front connection and soft contact, also called throughness. Connection is another key necessary to train a horse of any level. Connection is created when the back of the horse is raised and creates a strong bridge between the hindquarters and the forehand. Connection occurs when the rider activates the hindquarters of the horse, pushing it up to the bit to create contact. If the hand or hands of the rider passively receive the contact, the horse will have a chance to round its back and engage the hindquarters. This occurs during the half halt, at which time the nose of the horse might come a little behind the vertical. Since Western dressage horses might be ridden in a snaffle, curb bit, bitless bridle, or bosal, a judge needs to focus primarily upon the engagement of the hindquarters and the roundness of the back. In a curb bit, it is important to note that a horse should not have almost any contact with the bit except perhaps in the half halt. A curb bit helps with engagement of the hindquarters, but a rider should not try to establish a steady, firm contact with it in order to shorten or lower the neck of the horse, as that would create stiffness in the horse. Some indicators of connection include the poll of the horse being the highest point on the neck. The ears of the horse should be level and there should not be twisting at the poll. The nose of the horse should be slightly in front of the vertical most of the time. If the neck is too high or shortened by the hands of the rider, the back will become stiff and good connection will be lost. Tracking up in the jog is desirable, as mentioned before, and is an indicator of connection. However, many horses do not track up well due to their biomechanics. In this case, a judge should focus more upon whether or not the horse is stretching its neck down and out a little, seeking connection. Throughness shows that the horse is willingly accepting the aids of the rider. The horse will be in balance and self-carriage when it is well connected, and the horse will be attentive to the aids of the rider. Connection. This slide shows correct connection and contact with horses both in a snaffle and in a curb. In all cases, the horses are searching for contact, rounding their backs, and pushing themselves forward from the hindquarters. Horses in a snaffle should maintain light contact, but horses in a curb should not maintain steady contact. Connection in a curb does not necessarily mean that there is positive pressure on the hands of the rider. In between half halts, a horse ridden in a curb bit should put very minimal or no positive pressure on the hands of the rider. So here we are with the curb bit. So in between the half halts, the rein should be almost nothing in the hands of the rider. And then straight ahead. Then we'll come down the center line. Yep, nice and straight on the outside, holding with the inside leg. Good. Good, and ready to halt. As a horse moves up the levels, it must maintain all of the first three elements or spokes of the training wheel, but should also reflect increased impulsion, straightness, and collection. We will review them next. Impulsion. Impulsion is the fourth spoke on the training wheel, and it reflects the willingness of a horse to move forward with energy. it is very dependent upon a supple back. Tempo in collected gaits might slow a little so long as forward thrust, engagement, and activity in the hind legs is not sacrificed. Some indicators of impulsion are energetic gaits, pure gaits, a steady tempo that is not rushed nor lazy, freedom of movement, engaged thrust from the hind legs, and increased straightness. Straightness, which is the fifth spoke of the training wheel, means that the hind legs are in alignment with the respective front legs on both straight and curved lines. Because the hindquarters are broader than the forequarters of a horse, in order for the hind legs to travel in the tracks of the respective front legs, the horse must first be straightened. Through lateral work, such as shoulder in, the horse is taught to engage the inside hind leg, which creates a lowering of the haunches and allows the hind legs to step closer together. When the horse is allowed to bring the shoulder back onto the long track and is framed and straightened by the outside aids of the rider, straightening throughout the body of the horse occurs. Through straightness and impulsion, collection is created. Some indicators of straightness, as we mentioned before, are that the hind legs are in alignment with the respective front legs. The ears of the horse should be level. The horse should not have its head tilted to one side, which we commonly see with horses with their heads tilted to the inside. The neck of the horse should be centered between the shoulder blades, and the neck should not be overbent in the direction of travel. The hindquarters become engaged and the horse is well balanced. Indicators of straightness on a circle. To bend a horse so that the entire outside of the horse's body is on the circumference of a circle, a rider must first create lateral bend in the sacroiliac and lumbosacral joints where the lower back and the pelvis are joined. On the slide to the right, that joint is circled in a blue color and it's near the tail of the horse. The horse will then engage its inside hind leg and place it more under the center of its body, creating a degree of collection and longitudinal bend. The shoulders, thoracic, and lumbar vertebrae, which have very little, almost no lateral flexibility, will be turned onto the circumference of the circle. The neck should stay centered between the shoulder blades because the neck can twist and turn independent of the body of the horse. However, the horse needs to stretch its neck down and will have slight lateral flexibility at the pole, which is where the head joins the neck in order to seek contact. Soft tissue and around the rib cage will be slightly bent. When the rider prevents the hindquarters and shoulders from moving to the outside of the circumference of the circle, the hind legs will become in alignment with the tracks of the respective front legs. This image on the right shows the three places where there is lateral flexibility in a horse. The first one is the pole, the top where the head and neck are joined. Second is the neck, which can swing left and right as well as up and down. And third is where the sacrum is connected to the lumbar region, in the loin region of the horse. It would be similar to the waist of a human. Further indicators of bend on a circle are shown in these images, where you will see that the hind legs are in alignment with the respective front legs. The outside of the horse's body is on the circumference of a circle. The neck of the horse is centered between the shoulder blades, and the rider's body is straight and centered over the backbone of the horse. When the outside shoulder and haunches of the horse are brought onto the circumference of the circle, the horse will exhibit flexion and bend throughout its body. Bend versus flexion. Lateral flexion of the neck and or poll of the horse in and of itself does not create lateral flexion throughout the body of the horse. To create flexion and bend throughout the body of the horse, the rider must first move the hindquarters of the horse with their hips and leg to engage the inside hind leg of the horse. At the same time, slight lateral flexion at the poll should be created so that the whole body of the horse flexes and bends from the inside hind leg up over the back into the jaw of the horse. When judging bend on a circle, a judge should look to see if the outside of the horse's body is on the circumference of the circle, and if the hind legs are in the same track as the respective front legs. With horses that are pushing haunches in or out, you will often see the body of the rider twisted. As an example, the rider will put their outside shoulder more back so that with their hand they're telling the horse to move in one direction, and with their weight they're telling the horse to move in another direction. This will create crookedness in the horse. The image of a horse showing correct bend and flexion on a curved line. You can see the horse stretching, looking for contact. At the same time, it's slightly flexed at the poll, but with the neck centered between the shoulder blades, the inside hind leg of the horse is engaged. More than that, you cannot really say from a photograph. When changing flexion and bend on a serpentine or in a figure eight, in order to change the flexion and bend, a horse must first be straightened and then flexed, starting from the hindquarters to the poll and bent in the opposite direction. The inside hind leg of the horse should step well underneath its belly so that bend is created in the loin area at about the same time it is created at the poll. This requires a minimum of 3 steps because the horse is, let's say, in left flexion or bend. So the first step he would be bent to the left. The second step he could be straightened. The third step he could be bent to the right. However, it usually requires more than 3 steps, often 5 to 7, to create a smooth change of bending starting from the hindquarters and proceeding over the back of the horse to its head, where slight lateral flexion of the poll occurs. Okay, so here we have the horse in the correct bend on a circle with the rider centered over the backbone of the horse and the outside of the horse on the circumference of the circle. I'm going to try to zoom in to the legs so you can see that the hind legs are in the same track as the front legs. Okay, now we're going to deliberately take your outside shoulder and turn it back. Yep. And then the horse is going to be, let him just go where, then with your hand, flex him to the left, but keep your body in the wrong position. And then just, let him go around where, just see what happens here. Okay, so now we have the haunches coming in, and with keeping the flexion to the left, keeping your out, good, because now you're putting your weight on your outside here. I'm going to try to zoom in on this a little bit more. I'm going to try to show the legs again, that the haunches are falling in. Good. Now bring your body back into the correct position and put them back into the correct bend. Okay. Okay. Now we're going to deliberately overbend him at the neck, and with the rider using their inside leg, trying to make the circle, but actually ending up pushing the haunches out. So with your hand, bend the horse to the right, and with your leg, push him sideways. And then you see the hindquarters slip to the outside of the circle. Good. Good. Now serpentine. We're going to make a serpentine showing the correct change of bend as you cross the center line, the flexion and bend as you cross the center line. So again, as you go through the arcs of the circle, keep his backbone centered between your two sit bones. Keep the correct flexion and bend. Stretching him into the connection. Flexing to the right here. Collection is the sixth and highest spoke of the training wheel. It reflects lightness of the forehand and engagement of the hindquarters. Some indicators of collection include lowering of the croup, increased bend of the joints of the hind legs due to increased impulsion and straightness, and the neck will be carried a little higher due to a relative lifting of the forehand created through engagement of the hindquarters and a strong, supple back. Straightness and not spreading of the hind legs and squatting will create collection. Next, we will consider the collective marks, which include gaits, impulsion, the rider's position, seat, and hands, the rider's correct and effective use of the aids, as well as harmony. In the collective scores, ideally, those scores should be similar to the technical scores. Some overall visual indicators include purity of gait, elasticity of the gaits, whether or not there's a steady tempo, whether or not the horse is in a nice balance, looking at the energy transmitted from behind or impulsion, whether the horse is accepting of the rider's aids and how prompt the horse is to respond to the aids of the rider. You need to develop your own methodology, practice, and write it down. Gait methodology. The visual indicators for the gaits would be purity of gaits, the regularity, elasticity, and freedom of movement. Training issues are not included in the gait score because a gait could become irregular due to the rider holding the horse, as an example, too much. So you have to determine whether it is a pervasive and fundamental issue, which would be included in a gait score, or if it is something that's transient. When scoring gaits, keep in mind that a horse must have 3 pure and regular gaits to receive at least a 6, which is satisfactory. A higher score would depend upon the freedom and elasticity of the 3 gaits, and the final score would be an average of the 3 gaits. However, if a horse has 2 pure and regular gaits but 1 faulty gait, the score should be a 5, which is marginal, or less, depending upon how impure the faulty gait was. For example, if the faulty gait was marked down to a 3 or 2 in the test, the score must be a 4, which is insufficient or less. It is important to realize that the gait score is not an average of the scores for each of the 3 gaits when one of the gaits is faulty. For example, if a horse had a walk that scored a 4, but a jog that scored an 8, and a lope that scored a 9, even though the horse had 2 good and very good gaits, the collective score should not be more than a 5 because of the 1 faulty gait. However, if you average the individual gait scores, which are 4, 8, and 9, for a total of 21 and an average of 7, you are telling the rider that the horse has fairly good gaits, even though one of the gaits is not sufficient. Impulsion methodology. Some visual indicators of impulsion include the desire to move forward, the suppleness of the back upon which impulsion is dependent, the elasticity of the steps, overstep in the jog, a steady tempo, and if the horse drops the base of its neck, the front legs can also brace against the forward motion, and the horse would then become heavy on the forehand. For an 8 or higher, the desire to move forward in both extended and collected paces should be evident. Elasticity of the steps and suppleness of the back, together with engagement of the hindquarters and a steady tempo, are all key. As shown on the training wheel diagram, it is the skill of the rider that holds the spokes of the training wheel together. It is the rider who must learn to sit correctly in order to be able to use the aids correctly. It is possible that a rider could have a very good position, but not be very effective or correct with the use of the aids. When giving a collective score to the rider's position, seat, and hands, focus primarily upon the position of the rider. Visual indicators of a good position include a rider sitting straight with quiet hands and a supple lower back that swings in timing with the back of the horse. The rider's shoulders should be relaxed and in alignment with the shoulders of the horse, so that when circling to the left shoulder of the rider should be slightly back, and when circling right, the rider's right shoulder should be slightly back. Although nearly all riders favor one side or the other, a rider scoring an 8 or above must be able to keep their shoulders in alignment with the horse's shoulders and their hips in alignment with the hips of the horse. Otherwise, they will create crookedness, stiffness, and one-sidedness in the horse. This slide lists some of the visual indicators of a rider's correct and effective use of the aids. As mentioned previously, a rider could have a very good position, but not necessarily correct and effective aids. On the other hand, some riders might be able to compensate for the lack of a good position, at least to some extent, by having good feeling, knowledge, and experience, so that they are still able to communicate with the horse in an effective way. When scoring the rider's correct and effective use of the aids, keep in mind that a rider with a good position, as well as correct and effective use of the aids, should score higher than one who is effective but has a faulty position. On the other hand, a rider who is effective but whose position is somewhat compromised should score higher than a rider who sits correctly but is ineffective. Harmony between horse and rider is key to a good performance. A rider needs to be able to communicate with the horse both subtly and effectively through half halts. Then a rider needs to be quiet in order to determine through feeling to what extent the horse responded to the aids. To receive a score of 8 or above, the horse and rider should fulfill the requirements of the training wheel. The horse will be obedient to the aids of the rider, and both horse and rider will look relaxed. Presence, expression, and a willing partnership will become obvious. At the end of each test, a very short summary of the judge's impression can be very helpful to the rider. It should focus upon both strong and weak points so that it can be stated in a positive and objective manner. A judge should simply reflect upon what he or she sees, but not attempt to play the role of a trainer. This concludes this section of the WDAA Judges Online Forum. I hope it has been helpful and that you will also take the time to review and really understand the WDAA training wheel so that you can effortlessly incorporate its meaning while you are judging. A judge's comments can profoundly affect a rider, so try to keep your comments positive while you are also being objective.